I had a very conventional upbringing and career path. I went to an engineering college, and like all my friends, I joined an IT company. I resisted the urge to go to the US, although I gave my GRE. And because all my friends were either writing CAT or GMAT, I ended up writing both. And I went to a business school called the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. I think the only constant through all these years was I was a dancer, which was kind of this side hustle, which was, my creative artistic urge was that I wanted to be a dancer, but I don't think I had the courage to pursue it full time. And then I worked as a product manager in a company called Archana Technologies for about 8 years. And I'm told I was a very good product manager, and it's a job I really liked. Products interest me, technology interests me, bringing things to life interests me, so I was in a good place. But my grandmother died in 2007 because of pancreatic cancer. She had a book that she had written in 1974, and it was a book she self-published in the 70s, and in an age where there was no internet, where there was no social media, where gatherings like this were probably far and few between. She managed to sell 15,000 copies of her book. I think the last edition of Vanita Vantakalu was published in 1983 when I was 3 years old. But we always grew up with these stacks of books in the house because, that was her storage space. And I was raised by my grandparents for the first few years of my life. When Amma passed away, the book came to me. I mean, I was not a cook till that point. I was not a writer till that point. I had no ambitions of being a writer till that point. So one of the things my grandmother wanted to do was to write or translate her book into English. And she never found a path to do it. For whatever reason, she never found the right collaborators, the right translators, and it just became a dream of hers which never was fulfilled. So in 2007, I picked the book up and I said, I will try and translate it. And at that point, I had no idea what it would take. Initially, I thought translation, I can read Telugu, I can translate. I mean, I'm pretty reasonably okay with English. So I looked at it as a pure translation job. And I realized that was not going to work because, my grandmother wrote it for an Andhra kitchen where you had to be familiar with the space, with the spices, with the cooking techniques. So the recipes are kind of condensed. And because I didn't come to it with a cooking background, I was getting lost. Like, what are these recipes? What are these steps? Something is amiss. Then I started cooking. I started teaching myself to cook. So I had to cook through not just this book of hers, but she had like boxes with like thousands of recipes. So for me, it was not just this book, but I also had to kind of go through her archive of 50 years and figure out what recipes I wanted to kind of bring out in English. Then I met a photographer and a food blogger called Chinmay Bhatt, who had a very, very nice blog called Love Food Eat, and I really, really loved her work. So I wrote to Chinmay. Arjun was 6-7 months old at that point. Chinmay had a very young daughter who was, I think, 2 years at that point. So she would come home every weekend, and I would cook a few recipes. And I live in an apartment, I have a tiny kitchen, and we have just one window where the natural light is really good. So we would place like a table there and take pictures. So that's how this project started. So it was again a side hustle. I was just working on it over the weekends. These kids would drive us mad. We would still somehow manage to cook, take pictures, and we kept at it for like 2.5 years. And at that point, I started pitching the book to publishers. I said, hey, this is a book that is coming back alive after 50 years. And it's a book that was very popular in Telugu at some point in the 70s. And all publishers were interested, just because of the history, I think. I think they didn't care who I was. And this was a book that sold well. I think that's what publishers care about, if a book can sell. But once I started getting into conversations with publishers, I was very raw too. Like, I didn't know how to negotiate. I didn't know how to really take those conversations forward. And at some point I said, okay, my grandmother self-published, I'll self-publish too. So I have somebody who did it in the past. And it's her own work, which I'm again kind of bringing back to life, and I should self-publish. Okay, in the middle what I did was, because Chinmay was a food blogger, I tried convincing her to cook recipes herself. So I was trying to still try not to do the hard work. But she's like, I can cook, but I don't know what these recipes are supposed to look like. You know, I can try making these recipes, but you're the only person who will be able to tell if the recipe has turned out okay or not. So I realized I had to really cook through the entire, because when I would see the final dish, taste the final dish, I could kind of relate to, okay, we have finally arrived. So sometimes that would take multiple iterations of doing the same dish. So I think in 2014, I decided I will self-publish. So this is already 7 years spent just cooking, learning how to cook, still struggling how to write, or still unsure how to write at a certain level, and still unsure what this book will look like. I mean, I was doing all the work, but it was still, evolving in a state of evolution. And in 2014, when I decided to self-publish, I'm like, oh my God, I need an editor. Because I've just written this whole book without having any editorial input. You need to have a chemistry, I think, when you work with other creative people, and I didn't find that for a very long time. Finally, somebody introduced me to my editor of both my books, whom I love very much, Sonia. And when I met Sonia, in the first week, I knew, we had to work together on this book. But she told me it's going to take time. Like, how much more of my life should I give to this book? But she's like, if you want to make a good book, you have to give it, the time it deserves. So I'm like, okay, let's start. In my mind, I was thinking the manuscript is ready, the recipes are tested, maximum 3 months in my head. But we took 2.5 years after that. After I started, because I still was working full time, I still had a very young child. So we spent 2.5 years editing the book. And then at that point, I'm like, okay, I need a designer. So we've done the photography, we've finished writing, but who's going to put all this together? Like, where am I going to find this designer? Then I started kind of asking everybody, and I don't come from a creative field, so I had very limited, contacts, and I just didn't know where to find my designer. Then I sat on Behance for a month. So I found my designer after just kind of staring at Behance for a full month. And she happened to live in Budapest in Hungary, and she had self-published 2 books. And I wrote to Esther saying, will you do my book? And she said no. And the first answer is like, no. I'm like, can we at least have a conversation? How can you just say no? And she said, no, I'm busy. I have like other projects. And then I'm like, okay, can we just get on a call? But I was very persistent, I think. Every week I would just like casually remind her that I'm still interested. And I think she got fed up at some point and said, okay, let's talk. And when we spoke and she heard the story, something moved. Like she was really moved by the effort that had gone into the project, the time that had gone into the project. But she said, I'm busy till Christmas, so you have to wait. But once Esther got on board, she was just so into the project that we designed it, mostly over Skype. She was the designer, but I was there, like soundboarding and all of that. But she finished the work in like 6 weeks. And she flew to India, and we went to Hyderabad, and we actually saw the book come alive. And that was that. So that was the journey which got me to 5 Morsels of Love. And if you look closely, there's a little motif there, which is supposed to be 5 grains of rice. It's a little ornamental. That's to represent the 5 grandchildren of my grandmother. I'm the oldest. So 5 Morsels is also that. It's the 5 grandchildren paying a tribute to the grandmother. So the book got released. And because I've self-published, I've like driven my mom's Innova to the printer and like loaded up quite literally. I decided not to put pictures because I thought this will be more casual. But I have this picture of me in the Innova with like, it's packed with books. And I'm driving back home. And I have no idea what to do with these books. The books are there, the book's done. But again, I didn't have even a social media presence then. The book's done because that was the work that went into the book just consumed me. Like I did not sit and build social media following at that point. But then my editor is like, oh, well, how are you going to tell people about the book? Then I'm like, okay, maybe I should start an Instagram page and maybe I should just start talking about the book on Facebook, and because I really didn't know what else to do. But I did go on a book tour to the US because US has cookbook stores where the bookstores sell only cookbooks and nothing else. And there are 6 or 7 really iconic stores across the US. So I took my book on this little tour. It was an instinctive choice to take this book to these bookstores. And everywhere I went, the books were sold out. Like I would just go with 2 boxes, which was like 24 books. And they would just fly off like that. And the bookstore started asking for more. But I came back after this little tour. I came back to India and I was back looking for a job because I'm like, okay, book is done. Now I have to go back to my previous life as a product manager or whatever. But there was an article in Mint by this writer called Sumana Mukherjee. And that article got a lot of attention. And she said nice things about the book. And there was another article in Hindu a month or 2 later. And the writer Revati, she also said nice things about the book. So book organically started getting some attention. So that's the reality. I mean, it's not like I planned this. It was a super planned way of going about things. So this is 2016. 2017, the book won an award. It didn't win an award. It was shortlisted for an international award completely out of the blue. So many awards do not encourage self-published work because there is this stigma that nobody has published you, so you're publishing your own thing. But there was this one prize in the US called the Art of Eating Prize, which is given to a book that can be published anywhere in the world. But it has to be nominated by a bookstore, by an independent bookstore. So that book tour I had done in 2016, somebody had nominated my book. And suddenly I get this email saying, you have to send 8 copies, 1 to Copenhagen, 1 to New York, 1 to some 8 locations in the world to all these judges. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to waste so much money just shipping. And the email doesn't stop there. They're like, we will buy your book. I'm like, what kind of award is this? Where they're buying my book and asking me to send to these judges because they're like, we know you're independently published. I'm like, okay, the world can also work like this. The world can also exist like this. For me, it was just, okay, but so 2017, April 14th, the book made the shortlist. It didn't win. But it made the shortlist, and that again gave the book this whole new wave of attention, which I hadn't foreseen, I hadn't anticipated, I hadn't dreamt. Because it got this, NPR picked it up, and I should have screenshotted it, but I was on the main page of the NPR website next to Donald Trump. And I'm like, okay, what are the odds? What are the odds? Why am I next to Donald Trump? Anyways. But that article again, so I think, I remember this day very, very well. I think it was the 2nd of October. My husband and I were watching this movie called Newton in PVR cinemas. And I have a little notification which kind of, it does this ting whenever there's an order because they're so far and few at that point. I'm like, I need to listen, I need to, get motivated by these tings. And we're sitting in the movie theater and the tings are not stopping. Like there are like 100 things. I'm like, something is happening. So we had to go out and actually see where the orders are coming from and why they were coming from. And then we traced it back to the NPR article. 2018, New York Times published an article on the book. So this is 2 years after the book has launched. This again I remember very well because when Akshay asked me when I was writing 5 Morsels, what's your wildest ambition for the book? And I'm like, I don't have mind space to think of goals right now. But because he was being persistent, he's like, what's your thing? Like, what do you want? What is your biggest thing for 5 Morsels? And I'm like, maybe if New York Times writes it. I just said it like, and in 2018, May, New York Times had a really lovely article about 5 Morsels. And I was just again like, okay, where is this book going? I'm just really following where it's taking me. All along, I was also writing for the Art of Eating magazine, the same people who shortlisted my book for the prize. They also have a magazine and they asked me to write for them. So in these intervening years between 2016 and end of 2018, I never stopped cooking, never stopped writing. So those, again, were not super planned. I didn't say that I have to pitch articles, I have to pitch ideas, because honestly, I didn't know. I still don't know how to do that. But when people would ask me, I would write. I wrote a little for Hindu. I haven't done a lot of it, but whenever people would ask me, I would write. And I realized I actually enjoy it. I come from no background in writing, but I was a reader. I still am a very big reader. I think that's my greatest pleasure in life, to read. So this writing career was parallelly somehow taking off, without me even like realizing it, I think. I was putting in the effort. I won't disagree that I was not putting in the effort, but I was not actively pursuing it in a way. And at the end of 2018, I'm like, also by then my worldview, the lens to view the world had become food. Like if I would think about the environment, if I would think about climate, if I would think about forests disappearing, if I think about glaciers melting, somehow everything would come back to food for me. And I think it happens to a lot of creative people, like if you're doing photography, if you're making film, whatever is bothering you in the world somehow finds its way back to your work. So there were all these things that were troubling me, and I had to find hope in this chaos, the political moment we are in. All of that was just eating away at me. And I'm like, I can't be in this state of despair, and I can't not do something about it. I had to find hope. That was I'm like, okay, my next book should somehow address this. Like all these themes, inequity, social justice, all those things that were just like kind of really eating away at me. I had to find a path for that, an outlet for that at a certain level. Then I'm like, okay, I know all these cool people who are doing really great things in life. What if I write about them, and what if my next book is about them? These are people who still believe in growing heirloom rice. These are people who will go fight for the rights of women farmers. Cooking has somehow been the anchor in all their life journeys. So they're like entrepreneurs. My mom's a part of the book. My mom's a politician. Arundhati Nag, who founded Rangashankara, is a part of the book because she's an excellent cook. And I'm like, okay, I really admire these women, and they give me a lot of hope. And they're really inspiring stories because they all have had a struggle in life, and they have somehow come out of that struggle. And I think these are stories that will inspire not just me, but a larger audience. So end of 2018, I had this book idea that I was going to work on something that will be that will address many of the themes that I just spoke about, but in a way that I center the stories of these women and their recipes, and celebrate their kitchens, celebrate their cooking, and also celebrate their lives. 2019, I actually went on this big tour across India. Started at my hometown in the little town I grew up in Kurnool, and we ended this tour in the Himalayas, cooking and learning these new recipes. So I came back, I started working on the book, and then 2020, as we all know, everything just shut down. So did my brain, so did everything. I was just too exhausted to do anything. So I stopped working on the book, and there was a chance the book would have never gotten done. Because I think from 2020 March till like 2021, early 2021, I didn't write a single word. It was just shelved. The project was just shelved. I didn't have the mind space to write. There was just too much going on at home office, home school. It was just too much. I know all of us have lived through it, so I don't need to like go down that path. But 2021, I broke my left ankle. I don't know, I broke something in my left leg. I had a fall, and it was the middle of the delta wave, so I couldn't go to an orthopedician to get it checked, because I'm like, I'm going to put these two at risk if I'm going to get an x-ray, so I'll wait out this delta wave. And the delta wave just went on and on. So I didn't see like an ortho for like many weeks. Because I was stuck and I was in so much pain, I actually picked the book back up. I'm like, maybe I should write. Maybe I should really find, this whole thing of hope I'm talking about, I should really make it real for myself. So I started writing the book when I was in the middle of this whole thing. So this is 2020 March. And 2021 November, I finished the book. I worked with the same team. Sonia agreed to work with me, which I'm very grateful for. So she was my editor. Esther agreed to design the book, but our post-production took some time because paper shortage. I had COVID in Jan. My designer had COVID in Feb. We all were exhausted. We were all just recovering. It just, and then I'm like, let it take its time. Let it. So yeah, this book is new. It's just a couple of weeks old, and I can't believe it's done. I really can't believe it's done.